At least we've got a cool logo.
Alright, this is gonna be tricky.
The Saints. We call ourselves the Saints.
Maybe we should start at the beginning. Hello, I'm Snake. I've been into Saints Row from the start. I suppose you could call me Old Testament. Liked 1, loved 2, felt let down by the third when they dropped the balance of silly and seriousness harder than Johnny, then just kinda placidly liked 4. Feeling that frustration of when a series is no longer what you wanted in it, but the resignation that it isn't all bad. Hey, at least this is a decent follow-up to Crackdown and Saints knows it doesn't have one of its own. But then, am I even really into Saints Row when a majority of it isn't what I like about it? And well, that's the first confusing thing. The identity of the Saints Row series has always been unstable and chaotic. Saints Row 1 is this weird combo of Volition giving up on a free-roaming Punisher game, then looking at Grand Theft Auto and learning that people felt underserved by its side content. They beat GTA to the 360 and did well in its absence, but with a lot of people treating it as little more than the warm-up act while they waited for the real rockstar. Then when GTA 4 took to the stage leaning in a more serious direction, this let Volition pull a Saints Row 1-2 punch.
Would you rather go bowling or steal a septic truck and spray loads of sewage on pedestrians?
Further pushing that insane side content and promising to give people what they wanted from Rockstar. And it worked. No longer the warm-up act, Volition was bringing the heat. But that bonkers side content was still packaged with a semi-serious world and story, one which has stuck with me all these years. Me and a friend beat it several times over in co-op, and replaying it for this video has been a blast. Besides solid gameplay, it has some of the best character writing for a crime sandbox of this style. Then the third goes forth. We beat it once and that was it. It had lost us. I recently read an interview with 2 members of senior staff at the time saying that craziness was more or less always the natural trajectory of the franchise. People loved wacky stuff like insurance fraud, and so they kept leaning into it. The serious elements were taken as holding things back, and so making the world and story equally absurd was considered cohesion. Neither of these two worked on the first Saints Row, so I'm taking that writing of history with a grain of salt, but it was strangely melancholy to learn that this game, which really resonated with teenage me and still kinda does, was internally considered a stepping stone on the way to something I really dislike. I got harder than gat. It's the immediate issue with fan feedback. Of course people love the standout crazy stuff. It stood out. All a marketing mind will ever take from that is to make everything the crazy stuff, not realizing or even caring that it flattens the entire experience. And that's because nuance will always be the last resort of salesmen. A quote from said interview. We had long discussions in development over whether the Ronin should have swords on their back or not, thinking that players would care about that stuff. But they didn't. And I was kinda left thinking, sure, maybe, but you still should. Speaking as a vaguely pretentious games or art guy, even about an intentionally daft 2008 crime sandbox, the littlest details are the biggest sign somebody cared. Discarding that care because no one will notice is really telling to me. I'll admit, I never thought much about the swords on a sod's spine, but I did notice how empty the third felt. Also, didn't one of the gangs have swords? And well, sword or no sword, the third was also the series finally carving out not just a niche, but its own identity. This is the first entry which didn't have to build itself up in contrast to GTA, but to do that, it killed its own built-in contrast. Saints Row became the crazy one, unapologetically, without holding back, all the time and 24/7. And I really didn't like it. There is an irony that the moral conflict of the third is selling out and losing your soul, and to be incredibly melodramatic, that's what it felt like to teenage me. I think for all my love of 2, the third taught me more about what I like and dislike. Non-stop over the top is tedious and headache-inducing. Pole vaulters can only go over the top because they start on the ground. I hate do cool things buttons because I prefer to engineer my own, rare, cool moments. I hate vapid pop culture references, semi-ironic celebrity worship, and smug, above-it-all dialogue.
So that just happened.
Oh yeah! This is happening!
So if you want to know why I'm such a killjoy, you now know exactly who to blame. Me. Then there's 4. I don't have an unhealthy distaste for it like the last one, but I was checked out. I'd long since found another crime series which hit that mix of stupid and seriousness I seem to adore. Bit more wordy though. Besides what I read in those interviews, all of those feelings are around a decade old. Saints Row was a series that had 2 entries I liked. I'm only jokingly bitter about the third nowadays, and I may crack a joke at you if you tell me you like it, but there's no malice in that joke, just banter. And I couldn't even remember that Johnny wasn't actually dead, but that's because my interest sure was. So when that bloody trailer came out, I had one reaction. I like some of the action shots, and I like the idea of the leads being underdogs who take on bigger gangs not through unstoppable murder but surprise and daring do. If the heart of Saints Row is escalation, resetting to a lower power scale makes a good amount of sense, since that's more room to grow once again. But that's as much as I like, and that was all me seeing things in it. What I actually saw, I liked a lot less. While I just defended the idea of the characters, in practice they all came over like they're pandering to a demographic which only exists when a boardroom is off their tits. Their banter and designs were off-putting, and ultimately, I didn't want to spend time with these people. So while I'm not screaming woke like an alarmist clock, I'm also not sold. As a Saints Row fan, I understand the letdown, but as a Saints Row 2 fan, I well and truly understand the letdown. We haven't spoken in a while, but I know his number by—
I'm sorry.
Oh wait, they removed that feature. Marketing did ultimately work on me for the wrong reasons, which doesn't matter to marketing, but hey. Interviews and previews came out promising something that is in scale and tone between Saints Row 2 and 3, which was transparently people at Volition covering their fan bases, but okay, you got me curious. And from there, it gets even more intriguing. Different interviews from different staff are all saying different things about the new one's inception. Some said it's not Saints Row 5, but early on they settled on a mantra of 2 plus 3 equals 5. A soon-to-be important principal designer says it's all good aspects of previous entries, then relentlessly insists the game is more grounded multiple times per answer, while only ever seeming to know what happened in 4. You put all this together and now we're on Saints Row 11, and things aren't adding up. Glassdoor Reviews of Volition says it suffers from too many cooks in the kitchen creatively, and clearly they can't take the heat. But funnily enough, this inability to decide what their story is wound up being the most honest preview of the game I could find. And so I picked it up with a morbid curiosity which wound up beyond satisfied. As a player, this is not a game I would recommend. It plays like a shovelware free roamer from 2012 that we stopped talking about in 2013, but that's only the shallow reading. As a games criticism guy, I love it. If you dig beyond the surface level flaws, you're hit with a barrage of contradictory, unnecessary ideas, all threaded through a story which is disgustingly confident in its own charm while being excessively masturbatory, mealy-mouthed, and tone-deaf. As charming as used Cushell. As of right now, I can't say whether it's trying to recapture the spirit of old Saints Row, but I hope we'll figure it out as we go. And as cruel as it is to say, I kind of love pulling this apart. New Saints are supposed to be canonized after all, though this may just wind up a beatdown. Let's get this shit started. Saints Row the new one has 3 back-to-back openings, and none of them leave a good impression. Were this game a dancer, it would achieve the impressive feat of having 3 left ones. Worst foot forward, otherwise firmly in mouth. The first opening is the least offensive and least necessary. It's a flash forward. A businessman pulls up to the Saints' church mid-party, clearly intimidated. He steals his nerves and says he wants to side with the Saints. We see establishing shots of major and minor characters, random partygoers, and off-the-wall gags. The camera and staging treating all of these elements with equal importance, which blurs which shots matter and which are just fluff. And all the while, Antonio is led up to the boss, who we get a pretty clumsy body shot of prior to customization. And despite being dressed to depress, she goes and opens a wardrobe so we can customize our body. The boss and Antonio clearly have history, so the boss plays up their newfound power, then goes to make an address not just to their loyal Saints, but a challenge to every gang in the city. The feed starts glitching, and in an actually pretty cool cut, we go from a video of our revelry to being dumped into an open grave, moments with the friends flashing before our eyes. This intro is the least bad, but also fails to earn its place. In immediate terms, it fails to set up 3/4 of the core cast. Kev is shown DJing, so, bit of a hint at what he's about. But Eli's picking up a drink, and Nina is just walking. I had to make my guy a multiple amputee just so these two stood out. Give them shots which communicate a little of who they are. Show Nina impressing Saints outside with a modified car. Have Eli doing a little business seminar. Get rid of this stupid fucking cat! If I hadn't seen the marketing materials, I would have never guessed these two were important parts of the story before they just so happened to be up on stage with us. So this intro isn't strong to begin with, and as you progress further into the story, it starts to feel more and more superfluous. A narrative device used purely for style without substance. The intrigue of what's going to happen to the Saints feels cheap as there's no actual foreshadowing in the opening itself. There's no rewatching this and feeling like the context has been enhanced, quite the opposite. The story also doesn't build towards this party, giving it a sense of foreboding. When the party was suddenly a thing that was going to happen, it felt quasi-random. Not a bombshell, but a dud. I do also find it tacky we see the marketing boss prior to customization, and this could have easily been avoided. Just focus the camera on the closed wardrobe, then cut in. Done. As for character customization, I'm not really the right one to judge since I'm not actually into this stuff, so I'll say it's okay. The menus are clunky to navigate, but there's freedom enough. Plenty of people said it doesn't quite hold up to the old ones. Sure. In 2, I always played a schlubby British geezer who always looked a bit of a thumb, so my standards aren't really high. The menu in much of this game has Western motifs, and I think by following that, I lucked into the best voice. A modern cowboy starting up a posse. On this voice alone, I was occasionally endeared to the boss, as this time around they're often annoyingly smarmy, and this voice had a naive and earnest quality which went some way to balancing it out. The other male voices are just kinda snotty.
Who messes with the Saints? No one! I said, who messes with the Saints?
It's not the guitar, it's a silly naughty boy!
I also designed him to look like someone who might have been a bouncer at some point, but because I'm bad at it, he looks more like a giant muscular baby with a mohawk. Overall, this intro is as shallow as the grave we're dropped into, but it's going to be the next one which piles on the dirt. We cut to a few months earlier, an orientation video for private defense contractor Marshall. It's all very Starship Troopers / Robocop, a comparison which somehow surprised the game's principal designer since it's not just on the nose, it's downright in there. And yet this guy says it's not. It does the phone thing again, only without the cool effect or stylistic purpose, which makes me question their authorial intent. This game has a weird habit of trying to do camera tricks, but only when phones are involved. It turns out the MC is rewatching the orientation because it's his first day on the job and he's desperate to put in a good performance. So obviously the first thing he does is mouth off to a superior.
Well, I mean, we're about to be shot at, so I figured it couldn't hurt to brush up on our healthcare package.
If you weren't paying attention to the briefing, I don't think you'll live long enough for your copay to matter.
So I should be reviewing the life insurance policy.
You know, our job interview has a 5% mortality rate. Statistically, the odds were low that you would die before we hired you, but I allowed myself to be an optimist.
Your parents should have treated you better.
Yours should have treated you worse.
Credit to the game, the dialogue is efficient, both because I already hate everyone, and we've already hit the apex of this game's big joke. One of the core conceits of Saints Row the new one is, what if gang, but business? Could have called this Suited and Rebooted. What that amounts to is that sometimes during a shootout, characters will throw out surface-level gig economy or corporate speak. It's shallow juxtaposition and nothing more. Life is cheap and murder is lucrative.
Let's get paid!
This entire intro is that one joke over and over again. We annoy Gwen and talk about how much we want our bonus while committing mass murder. I didn't laugh the first time, and the next 15 minutes did not turn me around on it.
Gotta earn that performance bonus.
The problem with what if gang but business is simple.
And I said, look, I'm a businessman, and my business is crime.
Organised crime is literally financially motivated. What if gang but business is not a joke, it just is. There are actual jokes to be made, but besides taking more wit than this game can muster, it may also be more clever than it's allowed to be. Be your own boss isn't really a new twist on crime, it's just putting it in wankier terms. It's been that way since banditry. I actually have to give props to Saints Row III since while still underserved, What If Gang But Celebrity is a good base to work from. It's interesting satire, reflects something people really do, make celebrities out of criminals, but it's not flatly parodying something by just stating aloud what it really is. It's an actual angle to play, and it is played in story and in game. Back to the present, I hate the subtitle calling my character you. Don't yeet my chain, game.
This is no laughing matter!
I know. We're here to bust some guy called the Nawali. We raid his Western-themed compound as martial men die in droves. We go above and beyond. Literally. And it's thanks to our initiative that trifling Nawali is brought into custody. Despite all of this, our superior, Gwen, is not pleased with our performance and stiffs us on our much-needed bonus. Here's what the intro is trying to do. We're meant to be the young, motivated upstart whose brilliance goes unrewarded by our stuffy superiors. Gwen is meant to be that superior, and we're to relate to the frustration of succeeding in our own way but being unappreciated for it. To put it nicely, the game kind of botches this. Martial men are on the receiving end of a massacre, and framed against this slaughter, Gwen comes across not as a hard-ass unfairly keeping us down, but a professional trying to keep her troops alive against the odds. This makes the MC's antics come across not as charming, but childish, ill-timed, and petulant.
Shit! Whoa, take the turret!
I got it. I'm good with these.
No, that's not... You are damn lucky we don't have time to argue.
See? Told you I was good with these.
Just shut up and shoot.
I'm left immediately despising him. Meanwhile, the PMC flunky looks unbelievably forgiving.
Newbie, once we hit the saloon, you flank left while the rest of us hold the center.
Flank? But I can... Yes, ma'am. See? I'm flanking left as ordered.
She's got the patience of, a saint. Honestly, Gwen's only mistake in this situation is not firing us. And by that I mean shooting us in the back and writing it off as a misfire. This is going to be a consistent issue throughout the journey ahead, and it's why I know this intro is meant to have us coming across as a lovable goof, rather than a lamentable git. This game has an uncomfortable reverence for its leads. Despite their constant dick-headed moves, the framing always contrives to have them as in the right in fashions that are transparent and dishonest. It feels like they overthought how earlier Saints wrote its characters. Why did I do that? Back then, the leads would often do terrible things without hesitation. So, why did people like them? Well, there was no trick to it. The fact they were bastards was so obvious that it's never dwelled on. This allowed the writing to be snappy and the characters to be personable. It turns out people liked them because they were likable. It really is that simple. Saints Row the new one wants that same juxtaposition of likable people doing horrible things, but it overcompensates. It insists upon its protagonists, making out their violent antics as charming eccentricity, and the world is at fault when it fails to appreciate them. All this does is make the writing hypocritical. It breeds resistance and, at its worst, as in right now, downright contempt. And I know, the people dying here are part of the bad guy PMC. We're primed to find their lives disposable and death slapstick. The game tells you early on, it's cool, don't worry about these mooks, you're just here for your paycheck. I mean, okay, but what if they're doing that too? Why is it cool for them to meet their ends, but for us it's just making ends meet? We'll come back to that at brunch. Pompous as it is, if I were writing this game and had to include this intro and didn't have the entire senior staff rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic, including mine, I'd cut the in media res and start us here as a faceless, voiceless mook. We tried to follow Gwen's orders, but the situation forces us to be separated. We don't disobey her, but are put in a position where we have to act independently and wind up winning the day through our own initiative and cunning. Despite this, Gwen criticizes us for circumstances beyond our control, denies our bonus, and if we really wanted to drive it home, she takes credit for the Nawali's capture that should rightfully be ours. And boom, we've established that no matter how hard you try, if you work for the man, you are going to be used and tossed aside. This is when the boss decides not to be a pawn. We do character customization, followed by them tossing away their helmet, pissed at a system that will do nothing but take, ready to speak and stand up for themselves. Hell, could even be a nice little Saints Row, the first one, callback. If one of the messages of this game is going to be that the man won't respect you, maybe the opening shouldn't be a really good reason as to why. At least this way, I wouldn't immediately hate the boss. That'd come moments later. We get credits as the boss makes their way home in a beat-up truck. This finally lets me say something nice about the game. The drive into the city is incredibly well done. Santo Ileso looks really distinctive and the skyline is dotted with interesting landmarks, which the route chosen does an almost masterful job presenting to the player, first as a whole, before shifting and turning to present them more individually, building anticipation towards the open world. There is, however, someone neutering my praise.
Goat balls.
Really testies my patience?
Goddamn cow balls and pizzle stick between them.
Makes me question who the fuck scrote this.
Big, giant, splitting, dangling horse testes just swinging in the goddamn breeze, knocking back and forth like a pair of motherfucking clappers in a giant horse flesh crotch bell.
It's a gag that would only come over well if basically any part of the boss did, but after his one-man screwball comedy, I really want him to sit quiet for 5 minutes and let me enjoy the drive. One developer described this as the funniest part of the game. I'd say nuts to them, but they'd die of laughter. At home, we get our introduction to the friends. These new Saints gave everyone something to row about.
The Idols are trying to build a post-capitalist society where money is not a concept. Are you gonna help me get the waffle maker or not?
As an investor, I don't like wasting money.
I don't have to love it. I have to pay my student loans.
Poof. Amen.
My god, so much exposition, I might die of exposure. So, in decreasing order of actually having a personality, Nina is a struggling artist working for the Panteros, a car-themed street gang. She's working with them until she can break into the art world full-time. She is friendly. Eli is a wannabe entrepreneur. He is ambitious and snarky, yet friendly. Kevin bakes, has a waffle tattoo, DJs, doesn't wear a shirt, sleeps around, works for the Idols, a hypocrisy-themed street gang, and is friendly. He's not so much a character as he is verbs. The issue is, much like the gangs but business bit, they're not going to develop beyond this starting point. Matter of fact, they'll do the opposite, but hey, at least that's motion. This is also the first time the game really has to depend on sitcom-style call-and-response joke-telling, and it understands the structure but not how to do it gracefully. Every joke is painfully telegraphed and predictable, yet paced so slowly as if the audience would need time to catch the setups.
We just knock off a payday loan place. No one gives a shit if people rob those bastards.
You have a job now. You could actually just take the loan.
Eli, I don't do business with morally bankrupt companies.
You worked for Marshall.
It is further dragged down by the aforementioned fact this scene is trying to bring you up to speed on what everyone's deal is and show what good friends they are. The tragedy of it all is that it's trying to do so much yet it has so little to show for it, and that would be true even were the comedy well crafted.
What sort of waffle maker can I get for $35?
Presumably one that makes fucking waffles?
The boss does have the best lines, but then he's brought cocaine to a sawdust sniffing contest. Not that these softies would ever touch the hard stuff.
You look like you could use a mimosa.
Thanks, Eli.
Ugh. I mean, I'll give you a volition. It's a fitting drink for these mugs. Their relatability's a sham, their dialogue painful, and while I can't work OJ into this bit, would love to see him get hit by Agent Orange. Point is, their friendship feels forced. Perhaps they should have started as just roommates and we see the relationship develop. Starting with an established friendship is trickier, denies a potential avenue for growth, and has been done terribly here. But all of this does bring me to one of the most fascinating game articles I've ever read. One guy that got interviewed here and there was principal designer Damian Allen. I want to preface, I have nothing against this man personally, but I do not like how he interviews. He treats questions less as questions and more as opportunities to pivot things into marketing copy and vague promises. His answers are roundabout and often leave me feeling like I know less. Enter interviewer David Jenkins. His article starts with a scathing preview. He tears the new one a new one, and heads into the interview with an inquisitive tone. One which catches Damien off guard. He waffles so much Kevin may as well have a tattoo of him, and eventually David just goes for this haymaker. I must say, I do have my concerns about the new characters, as they do not seem very likable. I don't know what age they're supposed to be, but they look really young, and that's quite disturbing when they're talking about murdering people in such an offhand manner. To me, there's a visual and tonal disconnect there, and they all seem very smug. Smug seems like one of the key words I would use to describe the game's tone as a whole. These are not people I would want to hang around with. Jesus Christ. This for me is up there with Peter Molyneux being asked to his face if he's a pathological liar, and Damien is no Molyneux. There is no inertia for him to get any spin going with this. He's stuck. He thinks for a moment and pulls out Johnny, saying, well, he wouldn't exactly hang out with that guy. This backfires, as David hits back that younger players might find him aspirational, and while I wouldn't go that way, yeah, Gat is likable, he's fun, he's cool, you want to see him in action. This interview is incredible, better than Frost Nixon, and the weirdest thing is it's in the Metro. That's the shitty paper you get for free on the bus. So Damien has just been told the characters are unlikable, disturbing, and smug. So he says this. We really wanted to allow the player to express themselves through the boss character and the characters around them. Eli, Nina, and Kev, they are our friends and confidants and people that work with them. His response to being told the new characters are reprehensible is that people can express themselves through them. He retreats back to the marketing line, and it is the worst one given the circumstances, because it points to the biggest problem with Saints Row the new one. It is betting everything on the players loving these characters. It does not have a strong hand, it has been told as such, and yet it will not fold. This approach feels like another reason the new one contrives to present its leads as justified no matter what they do. Like it has it in its head that players will relate to them in such a way that it fears slighting this imagined audience by proxy of the characters. This stalls the protagonists from ever being too interesting or defined. To call them characters already feels like a stretch. They're closer to horoscopes. Utter Pisces of shit. Frankly, the biggest insult would be if you could even begin to see yourselves in these monstrosities. I've met people in Gen Z, and bar a small selection of terminally online oddballs, they're just people. They don't act like this. This portrayal is an insult to the generation after mine. Oh wait, hang on. Oh, these are meant to be millennials. It's a millennial power fantasy. It's just an insult to my generation. And hey, it's brunch. So let's go back to the PMC guys, particularly in relation to this scene. You know, sitting around a table with friends, talking about the harsh realities and injustices of life. I get that it's a stylistic choice. It's part of the joke of the world. The job is murder, but it pays the bills. You get it?
How did Marshall get things we do for rent?
But the juxtaposition is lopsided. Instead of coming across like an organic marrying of absurd world with true-to-life problems, it's a switch that gets flipped when it's decided that life has weight again and the audience must care. It ironically works against the protagonists, making them feel selfish and inhuman. I imagine it's part of why David was put off by young people talking about murder. The premise is wishy-washy and doesn't establish itself. And I promise, we're nearly done with the intro. I know it's taken a while. This game doesn't exactly wait to tell you about its issues. And they need money.
We just knock off a payday loan place.
And despite some protests, the gaggle, I ain't calling them a gang, head off to the payday loans joint.
Ooh, can we take a hybrid?
Eli, I love that you're worried about fuel efficiency, but I reckon acceleration is gonna matter more.
Your carbon footprint always matters.
That's nice, Eli. I'll leave a carbon footprint on your throat. On the ride over, this twerp plays a recording of his favourite motivational speaker, Roger McGillicuddy.
What's the rule?
Don't yuck someone's yum.
Life throws your way. You have more agency and power than the world wants you to know.
This is meant to communicate Eli's hunger to make it.
Roger McGillicuddy speaks the music of my soul.
The thing is, what bits of the speech you can pick up on are so incredibly cliche that it winds up just making Eli come across as a complete poser.
What can I say? The world is full of uninteresting people, and I'm not going to be one of them.
Alright then. We've had a lot of awful lines, but good God. Are we listening to Roger McGillicuddy because we forced Eli to drop Jordan Peterson? Eli, mate, you are so goddamn basic, I could code you on an Atari. The robbery goes down and the group splits up. Eli and Kev take the money while Nina and Boss run distraction. The cops come after us, and this makes twice in a row the radio gets stolen from me. They waste a licensed track on this random, easy, early game police chase. While this is a me issue, this coincided with the moment I decided that my character's going to be a metalhead. Yeah, I sometimes pick my radio station based on what I think my character would listen to. I don't know how weird that is, but it's not like I can do it right now. First time we get to drive a car under duress and I can't even listen to the music I want. Some freedom to express myself through the character. Our switch car has been scrapped by some Panteros.
I ain't got time for this shit today.
So we nick a bike, nearly fall into the hands of the police, and Nina does this. The two drive home, saying this city is full of promise. And well, something better be. My issues with this segment are more sneaky than everything we've gone over so far. Not as outwardly annoying, but no less all-encompassing.
And you know how we should celebrate afterwards.
Karaoke!
Yes!
No, not that.
Last time we got creative, I got stabbed 3 times.
You got one of those for me?
You really want one after last time?
I am not the first person to accidentally shoot a friend by dropping a loaded... Yeah, okay, I don't need a gun.
If you're lucky, the cops will get to you before my people go.
The Marshall intro shows us as an over-the-top badass.
You really think you have what it takes to bring me in?
I mean, yeah.
The only thing which can deign to go toe-to-toe with us is a criminal so dangerous an entire army has been sent after him, yet we're the difference maker. Now we're robbing a payday loans joint and the story wants to pretend this will be in any way daunting, and for some reason we need these goons to get away with the getaway? We're told in our previous capers we only got away by the skin of our teeth, but then throughout the rest of the game, it keeps telling us the characters were always brilliant, and also Nina just does this. To not so simply summarise, there are vampires that can handle stakes better than this game, since they at least have the heart to go through with it. Again, the characters and the way they're handled is the problem. It leaves the dialogue vacuous and events unexciting. They're all meant to be brilliant yet unappreciated, yet it still wants to act like they're at risk of failure because we're also meant to be underdogs finding our feet. It wants our victories to feel easy because we're great, yet monumental because we're overcoming the odds. It can't have it both ways, but it keeps trying. This results in repeatedly paying lip service to the idea of danger while never baring its teeth. One line in particular really irks me on rewatching.
If you're lucky, the cops will get to you before my people.
That could have been a good moment to show the characters have miscalculated, made a mistake and things have gone awry. Genuine tension and a new problem they have to get out of. It might even suggest they're not perfect and have room to grow. Can't have that now, can we? Instead, hiccups in their plans are only ever born from things outside of their control or where circumstances force their hands. The characters only miscalculate twice throughout, and these exceptions will somehow be even more confounding. Going back to Saints Row 2 once again to kind of curb stomp this entire intro in terms of character, stakes, and characters making mistakes, my favourite arc is the Brotherhood questline. I love how this entirely avoidable conflict begins and escalates because of the boss. An amazing little thing happens in the first meeting with Mero. His girl makes an off-color joke which sets things off on the wrong foot and reveals a good amount of character for everyone in the room. This does more in one tiny little moment than the 5 minutes everyone here spends reading off their fact sheets. The boss is offered a 20-80 split, and if you do this plotline first, this comes over as pretty deferential. However, given the boss's arrogance, he balks at the deal and kicks off the conflict as a matter of petty pride. This escalates into an incredibly messy war, with both sides sinking lower and lower in retaliation, the Saints only winning because of the boss's raw brutality. Every arc in Saints Row 1 and 2 have the Saints face genuine resistance, make errors, and take losses, and the Brotherhood has one of the series' most famous examples. It keeps things exciting and makes the victories really land. It's why I love the boss in Saints Row 2. His arrogance, capacity for violence, and willingness to do anything to win works in service of gameplay and story. And the fact is, violence and mayhem is really all he's good at. It's an actual character trait which doesn't always work in his favour. He creates many of his own problems, but lucky for him, he's also an excellent troubleshooter. This makes him dynamic, entertaining, and believable within his setting. He's a terrible human being, but a really fun character. This boss also winds up more relatable as a game protagonist as his personality and goals cleanly align with the players. Build the Saints and have fun. When I'm playing as him, we get along like a house on fire. Probably a fire we started. And that's tragic because compared to the new one, it's so startlingly obvious and effortless a way to have the player connect to the character. He's a perfect conduit for play. Having my ultimate murder badass gripe ineffectually about student loans doesn't build connection. It makes me wonder if the message is I should Kaczynski the SLC. Despite everything, if I was going to start the game anywhere, it would be here. Open on us getting stiffed on our bonus, meaning we have to work our second job to make ends meet. This would give the game a cleaner sense of escalation, make the peril problems less pronounced, and tie into the game's themes less messily. I hate this intro by far the most, but it is also the most necessary. It's just made that bit worse by what's around it. And with that, we are free of the openings. They do a better job introducing the game's problems and its characters, though as you can guess, they're often one and the same. If Saints Row the new one is trying to recapture the spirit of old Saints Row while telling a story that's more nuanced, character-focused, and complex, it's doing bad. Overcomplicating, misunderstanding, or undermining what worked before, while failing to make a good case for the new. Now, I want to say, for all of my reverence of 2, I don't just want 2 again. I can go and play it now. It would be nice if we had a PC patch, but hey. As a series fan, I want to see the qualities I like carried forward, but taken in interesting new directions to keep it at least a little familiar, a little fresh. I am someone who believes you shouldn't just give people what they want, but what they don't know they want. It's risky. I mean, I fell off at the third, so yeah, I know full well. But I can understand why people like it, and it undeniably carries Saints Row's DNA. But this is a genetic aberration. Who is this for? Who does this please?
Let me get the McGilligan.
No!
And let's have one last interview snippet, this time from executive producer Rob Loftus. When asked how he'd respond to those hesitant that the new game isn't gangster enough, what he more or less says is, well, you do criminal acts. It's such a strange dismissal or utter lack of understanding with what the criticism really is. I'm personally not fond of much of the backlash. I think angry people drowned out saner heads and gave Volition a nice excuse to ignore everything. Not that they helped themselves. But if I was asking that question, I would be frustrated by that answer when there's a million possible good ones. Times have changed. We're depicting another aspect of criminality. We didn't want to tread on the toes of the old characters. We really need to use Saints Row, otherwise we are going completely bankrupt. You don't have to kowtow, but as a series which played to gangster culture, maybe explain that that image of a gangster isn't in the zeitgeist anymore. Though I'll say this, for a Saints Row game, especially one claiming to take after 2, trying to cushion the characters' mistakes and sand off their rough edges to make them more presentable is a naive endeavor. Much like sandpaper, they only work because they have some grit. Even separated from its larger franchise, it's just a poor story on its own merits, and Christ, I'm saying that before we've even gotten started. I mean, I'm saying that after having finished the game personally, but the intro alone has dragged this much out of me. I keep hitting things and going, oh god, I have to explain this within the first hour? It's in a way impressive. To be so obnoxious and packed with problems, I think I just went over what would be in most cases an entire narrative's worth of shortcomings before the title card. This game will never be on a greatest of all time list, but it manages to get my goat constantly. Still, all in all, the intro does a good job of accurately priming the player for what's to come. The journey ahead will be awkwardly paced, indecisive, mealy-mouthed, tone-deaf, and try to be everything while failing to be anything, so points for honesty.